Kwame was never the same after that night. The once ambitious apprentice, whose hands had sought to claim glory, now moved with a weight that seemed to crush his spirit. He no longer weaved in secret, no longer sought the admiration of the villagers. Instead, he worked tirelessly to care for Zora, who grew weaker with each passing day. Tariq, on the other hand, returned to his loom, his hands weaving tapestries with the same grace and care as always. But there was something different now, a heaviness in his movements, a quiet sadness that lingered in the air around him. He had forgiven Kwame, but the village had not. The sickness continued to spread, and with it, the village grew colder. The laughter that had once filled the streets was gone, replaced by the sound of coughing and the soft sobs of those who had lost loved ones. It felt as though the very heart of the village had been stolen, leaving only a hollow shell behind. One day, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the village, Kwame approached Tariq once again. This time, he did not kneel, he did not beg for forgiveness. Instead, he stood tall, his face pale with exhaustion, but his eyes clear. "I want to learn," Kwame said quietly, "not just how to weave, but how to weave joy." Tariq looked up from his loom, his eyes softening for the briefest moment. "It's not something I can teach, Kwame. It's something you must find within yourself." Kwame nodded, understanding. He had thought that weaving was about skill, about technique, but now, he knew that it was about more than that. It was about heart. It was about the love you poured into every thread, the joy you felt in creating something that could bring happiness to others. For weeks, Kwame worked alongside Tariq, watching, learning, but more importantly, feeling. He no longer focused on the final product, on the praise he might receive. Instead, he focused on the process, the way the thread felt in his hands, the way each stitch connected to the next, creating something greater than the sum of its parts. Slowly, the village began to change. It wasn't sudden, the sickness still lingered, and the air was still heavy with sorrow, but there were small moments, glimpses of joy that had been missing for so long. A child's laugh here, a smile shared between neighbors there. It was as though the very act of weaving with love, with heart, was beginning to heal the village in ways that medicine could not. And then, one day, Zora opened her eyes. She was weak, barely able to sit up, but she was alive. Kwame, who had been sitting by her side for days, his hands clasped around hers, let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He wept then, not out of guilt, not out of sorrow, but out of gratitude. He had been given a second chance, and he would not waste it. The village had not yet fully recovered, but the worst had passed. The sickness had claimed many lives, but it had spared others, and those who remained were determined to rebuild. There was a quiet resilience in the air now, a determination to find joy again, to weave it back into the fabric of the village. Tariq continued to weave, but now, he did so with Kwame by his side. The two worked together, not as master and apprentice, but as equals. Kwame no longer sought to be seen as the best, no longer sought the admiration of others. Instead, he focused on weaving joy into every piece he created, just as Tariq had taught him. One day, as they worked side by side in the shop, Kwame turned to Tariq, his hands stilling over the loom. "Do you think the village will ever be the same?" Tariq smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "The village will never be the same, Kwame, but that's not a bad thing. We don't weave to preserve what was, we weave to create what can be." Kwame nodded, understanding. As the weeks turned into months, the village slowly returned to life. The children's laughter returned, the streets once again filled with the sounds of everyday life. But there was something different now, something deeper, something more meaningful. The people of the village had learned, just as Kwame had, that joy was not something you could take for granted. It was something you had to create, something you had to weave into every moment, every interaction. And so, the village thrived once again, its heart stronger than ever before. As for Kwame, he continued to weave, not for fame or glory, but for love, for the joy of creating something beautiful, something that could bring happiness to others, and in doing so, he found a kind of peace, a kind of fulfillment, that he had never known before. Tariq, too, was content. He had passed on his greatest gift, not just the skill of weaving, but the understanding that true strength, true love, comes from weaving joy into everything you do, and that, in the end, was the greatest tapestry of all. The moral of the story is that true strength, love, and success come not from ambition or external recognition, but from the heart we put into our actions. Kwame learned that while skill and talent may impress others momentarily, it is the joy, love, and sincerity woven into our efforts that truly make a lasting impact. Betrayal and shortcuts can lead to emptiness and suffering, but redemption and healing come when we act with humility, compassion, and integrity. Through forgiveness and genuine work, we can rebuild trust, restore joy, and create something meaningful for ourselves and others.